It's time to put some balance back into your life. Ian O'Neill here, along with my, I guess, North American correspondent, Theo is joining me today in replacement of Harry Powell, who is away for a couple of days. But what a replacement that we have. Theo has been doing the thing years, has gone and reported on a couple of live UFC events, does the UFC recap for us every week on SevereMMA.com. Theo, thanks for joining me, my man. We were just talking before. It was like, it's kind of nice for me to be on a similar time zone, not the same, but a similar one. Poor Harry has to stay up till all hours, but I'm in the evening time now, I guess, in Saskatoon. You're in the evening time and the outskirts of Boston right now, joining me.
Yeah, awesome, man. I'm so excited to be here. What an honor it is to feel at BJJ Harry Powell's seat. What an honor that is. But yeah, I'm really excited to actually be on camera for the first time since I think maybe last April with the Ian Gary interview or something like that. But yeah, can't wait to get into this card, man. It was awesome for the main card. The prelims not so much, but it certainly heated up when we needed it to. So yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. We were texting there, and you had said I was at another event over the weekend. I didn't get to watch the prelims live. Caught the main card live, all right. And you were saying that the prelims were tough. I still went back and watched them. Yes, they were tough, but luckily for everybody listening here today, we're going to go from the top down, and we're not going to go from the bottom up. So no one has to bear the unexcitedness of the prelims card per se. And look, it was all action in the top of the card, though. I mean, lots to talk about on the main event, and we're going to get straight into it here. Mayra Bueno Silva took on Holly Holm in the main event at 135 pounds in the women's bantamweight division, and she pulled off a fantastic ninja choke at the end of round 2, really, in what was a pretty interesting fight, and a one, Theo, to me, when I was looking at it, that didn't look like it was going to go all the way if Mayra Bueno Silva had anything to do with it, and she did get her way. And it was Holly Holm's approach to the fight was something similar that we did see against Yana Santos, where, which is kind of peculiar, and maybe we can talk about a little bit about that, maybe is of her recent change in style. And for one who is a former champion boxer and has known to be very successful kickboxing inside the octagon as well, she's recently tried to kind of close the distance, clinch, and kind of battle up against the cage with a couple of her recent opponents, and that's exactly what she tried to do again on Saturday night. And obviously Mayra Bueno Silva was privy to that, and she kind of countered it as well with a beautiful ninja choke. But maybe share your thoughts on the fight as well, how it kind of played out throughout. I mean, like I said, Mayra Bueno Silva was kind of pushing the pace. She was playing a dangerous game with a good counter striker in Holly Holm, who can put people away on the feet. But, Holly Holm's game plan kind of played into that style a little bit, really. Would you agree?
Yeah, and it's an interesting point you bring up there about how Holly's style has sort of changed over the last couple of years. Now, I think we see this a lot with fighters who start to get older. They start to get a bit more wear and tear on their body, and they can't really hang up with that style that they used to. Like, I think of Jose Aldo. When he was on his WEC run, he was spamming leg kicks. He was killing people with that. And as he got older, he realized he can't really throw as much as he used to. And I think now we're kind of seeing a similar thing with Kamaru Usman as well, where, he's not as aggressive with his takedowns. He's not trying to engage in wrestling a lot because of his knees, allegedly. So, yeah, it's just one of those things that I think is always going to change for fighters over time. And it's all about, if you want to have longevity in the sport, you got to be able to adjust. And unfortunately, I just don't think that Holly Holm had the correct game plan here to deal with Mayra. But fair play to her, because if she was going to win this fight, it was going to have to be where she took an opportunity against the cage to jump on something. She locked up that ninja choke beautifully. And I think she's going to be a problem going forward, man, because she's such a great grappler in that division. I don't think bantamweight is super, super deep right now. And it's been more wide. It's more wide open now than it's ever been, ever since I would say UFC 200, since Amanda actually took the belt. So I'm really excited to see what happens going forward here. And I'd love to see her take on Juliana Pena for the vacant belt, if I'm being honest with you, because I really don't know anyone else in that division that I'd want to see fight for that belt, because none of them are really standing out. Ian, would you agree?
Yeah, not really. Like, me and Harry kind of talked about this on the preview show ahead of it, like maybe the landscape. And look, at the landscape is a little bit more clearer after the result of this fight, I guess, on Saturday night as well, where there isn't really a standout kind of person that I would kind of label as the next or the future of this division. Like, I was even resorting to the fact of maybe a couple of women moving up from the 125-pound division to kind of come up here and maybe stir the pot a little bit. But what we do have actually is, you know, a couple of contenders. Obviously, Mayra Bueno Silva is one. We have Pennington. We have Pena. There's a couple of women at the top that are looking to come through. And I mean, what the UFC is looking for is people go out there and have exciting finishes, have an exciting fight, have an exciting style. And that's what Mayra Bueno Silva actually did and showcased against someone like Holly Holm, because we've seen other women go in there against Holly Holm where they've kind of been tentative. They've been unwilling to kind of let loose and maybe implement their game plan with the fear of, you know, maybe getting counter shot. Or like, Holly Holm is a really good fighter. She's 41 right now. So she is, like you said, coming on somewhat a bit of a decline. And I definitely saw in recent fights, not that same level of explosiveness in her game that she once did have. And maybe that was what kind of made her decision to kind of utilize different game plans, utilize different styles, really coming in to this fight and to previous fights as well. Theo, how did you think that she looked coming into the fight? And like, literally, like, walking into the arena, I text Sean and I was like, Holly Holm looks beat up as hell here. She looked like she's just after being in a fight, not walking to get a fight. Looked like there was a little bit of a cut under her eye. Looked fairly beaten up and haggard. And I was like, that was my first alarm bell on the night, really. Did you kind of get that vibe when she was walking into the arena?
I'm so glad you asked me about that shot specifically, because I think a lot of times in the Apex, the walk-in is a little bit different, right? Because you're watching them come through the headquarters, you're seeing the sun come through the windows. It's a bit of an odd setting, but that light that they use on that camera for those walkouts, I don't know if they're so close or something, or they're using a different brightness of light. The light is so bright on those shots that it makes anybody walking through there look pale. Remember when Megan Anderson was walking in to fight Amanda Nunes in the Apex? That shot of her walking in, people were like, she looks like a ghost walking.
Yeah, she was nervous as fuck that time.
And to be fair, she definitely was. But I do think a lot of that is just, you know, the Apex angle that they use to walk in makes everyone look bad. With that being said, I did think the same thing when I saw Holly Holm walk in. I thought, wow, she looks beat up already. She looks nervous, but, you know, not to say that Holly ever really exuded a lot of confidence. She was never like this outwardly brash fighter, but she did look unsure of herself when I saw her walking in there. And like you said, you know, her style had to change just because of her age now. I thought she looked a little bit slower on the feet. I thought she looked a little bit more sluggish in her entries. I thought she looked a bit more hesitant to engage, if you want to call it that. But yeah, I just didn't have a good feeling about Holly Holm as soon as fight night hit. I thought that she had a better chance as the week went on, but as soon as we saw that shot of her walking in, as soon as we saw the fight start, it didn't feel like it was going to be Holly's night.
Yeah, I was the same. Like, I mean, you could never count Holly out ever, I don't think. Obviously, look, at everybody kind of comes to a time where, you know, you'll fall off a cliff, or you won't be able to perform as good as you once did. And we kind of had seen that with Holly, but at the same time, you know, I hadn't seen too much from Mayra Bueno Silva to kind of compliment me being super confident about her going in there and getting the job done. But I can guarantee you one thing. She was uber confident. She looked ready all week. She looked like she was in the zone, and she came out and she performed really, really well on the night on Saturday night. Was there anything in particular that stood out for you in her performance inside the cage against Holly on Saturday night?
I mean, it's that choke. It's the same one that she used to gain a UFC contract on the Contender Series, that ninja choke against the cage. You know, a lot of people were sort of looking for, or not looking forward to this fight, I should say, because another, you know, Holly Holm main event, another one we think is going to go to the decision. That's going to take a long time. It's going to feel a lot longer than 25 minutes because of all the cage work and clinching. But I think really what makes Mayra stand out here is that she's able to be dangerous in those spots that many are more willing to be lax in. More people are willing to say, okay, well, if she's got me against the cage, I guess I'll just rest right now. I guess I'll just wait till she makes a mistake here. But Mayra's aggressive in that area, which I think is going to make her even more dangerous to these other girls in the division that are going to have to deal with her issues. And when you've got a submission game that's as dangerous as Mayra, when she's willing to engage and willing to take chances, that's a dangerous fighter to deal with. So, yeah, I thought that was really what made the difference in this fight, was she was willing to take chances, where I thought that Holly just wasn't.
Yeah, and it was all very strange. Like, you made a couple of great points there on Holly and on Mayra as well, is that, you know, Holly was always a person who never looked super confident or was never kind of brash in her predictions and fights, very humble fighter. But you could see that change when she got in there, especially in her older fights as well, where, you know, she might win an exchange and you could see her confidence grow and grow and grow throughout the fight. And I feel maybe she's been in this kind of situation for the last little while, but maybe there's been nobody in with her to kind of punish her for that, really. And I don't think that Yana Santos was capable of doing that the last time, but Mayra Bueno Silva's unwillingness to accept that position against the cage, her willingness to walk Holly Holm down and go on the attack and try to fight the finish here, I thought was, number one, very brave, but also shows the kind of growth in confidence in her game as well. And now she's coming in, she has 4-fight win streak. She's getting primed up. I think, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if the UFC stuck her in there for a title shot next. I mean, obviously Pennington was the backup fighter for Amanda Nunes. And she definitely, based off what the UFC have been doing recently as well, deserves that as well. You know, if you're going to be cutting weight for nothing, normally the UFC will reward you with the title shot. And well, I guess Juliana Pena is going to stake her claim as well. And she's very vocal. She's not afraid to express her opinions as well. What do you think is going to be next for the bantamweight division? How do you, maybe there's be two separate questions. What would you like to see would be number one, and what you reckon is going to happen number two? Because sometimes what we like to see is completely different than what the UFC want to do.
It's almost never what the UFC wants to do. It's what we
Yeah.
want to see. But what I want to see personally is Mayra. I think that she's just more dynamic than the other girls that are above her in the rankings. I think she sticks out more, like I said previously. And, you know, like I said, I just think that the style with Juliana Pena is so fascinating to me that, you know, Pena is going to be an aggressive striker who's going to walk forward. You know, I think she gained a lot of confidence after that win over Amanda Nunes, even though we saw the rematch didn't really go her way at all. But I think that style matchup is the one that I want to see the most. And I think it also makes sense in terms of, you know, she just got a win over Holly Holm, who not only holds a high ranking at the time, but she's also a legend of the sport. And she also just did it in a main event on ESPN or whatever it is that you guys watch over there. But you know, I think that's a big thing that the UFC cares about. And Juliana Pena is a woman who has headlined a pay-per-view before, who has beat a supposed GOAT of women's MMA. So I think that those two people are, you know, the best combination of marketable and exciting fighters to watch. But, you know, I can't deny that it would feel a little bit weird if Raquel Pennington was sort of the odd fish out of this one, right? Because, you know, they do always reward the people who go and cut the weight when they don't have to. And, you know, It seems like Raquel is not the type of girl who gives the UFC a ton of problems when it comes to negotiating. So, you know, I could see them doing Pena, Raquel, and maybe they build up Mayra a little bit more. But I think right now with the way bantamweight is and how shallow it is, in my opinion, that you just throw Mayra in there against Juliana Pena and see what happens.
Yeah, I think that'd be a firecracker of a fight, to be honest. I do agree with you. It'd be very harsh on Pennington now to not give her that. So maybe you do Pena. I think, like, if you're looking at it from a marketing perspective, I think the UFC are probably going to be looking to try and situate Juliana Pena as the champion, someone who's very outspoken, someone's not afraid to talk and build a fight. And, you know, it's not everybody's cup of tea, Juliana Pena. I was over there. She was kind of doing the Q&A and doing some other stuff over at UFC Vancouver. But when I was at the Q&A with her, it was just before the weigh-ins. When she spoke with conviction. You could feel the energy and the meaning of everything that she says. She does talk a lot of sense. She does talk a lot of nonsense too, let's be fair, at the same time as well. But out of the top three in Pennington, Bueno Silva, and Pena, I would be kind of liking Juliana Pena to probably be the person to beat. I think she's definitely going to be in that title shot, whoever it may be next. Maybe you do Pennington and Pena and have Bueno Silva as the backup fighter for that. Just let her, I mean, you're on a 4-fight win streak. You don't have to prove too much more after just getting a win from Holly Holm as well. So very interesting to see what happens and how all that kind of materializes. And look at Mayra Bueno Silva will move up. Holly Holm is going to move down, unfortunately. You know, she suffered a loss. Although, you know, we've kind of said here, Theo, is like she kind of has fallen off a little bit of a cliff, but not devastatingly yet. I think she can still be competitive within the division. Will she put another title run together? I'm not so sure, but there's definitely a couple of fun fights for her left in the division. Like, what would you like to see next for Holly Holm?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough, right? Because like you said, she can still be competitive, but, is she going to be fighting for the title soon? I know the saying with Holm is she's always one fight away from a title shot. And especially with how open bantamweight is right now, I wouldn't say this one loss is going to end her career necessarily, but, when you see the way she looks in there and it's just, you think about all the big fights she's been in, all the money she's made, or I shouldn't say that because, with the way they're paying in these days, you never know. But at least she's been in big fights, so she's hopefully gotten paid a lot. Yeah, I would just hope that she's not looking to get herself hurt anymore. I know she's a family woman. She's been in this game for a very long time. She's had an extensive career before even the MMA stuff happened. She's a Hall of Fame boxer as well. So yeah, I mean, I would not be the person to ever say this person should retire, this person should do this, because what do I know? But I'm not a fan of people sticking around for too long if it's not for the purpose of trying to be the best in the world. But everyone's different. Everyone has different motivations. Some people want to prove different things. And Holly's already proven she's a champion. She was a champion before. She beat Ronda Rousey and what was at the time one of the biggest upsets in the history of the sport. So maybe she's chasing something else. Maybe she just wants to stick around to prove that she can win the later half of her career. So I really don't know what to say at this point about Holly Holm, but I think there's definitely fights.
I have a fight.
Go ahead.
What about if we put her in there with Miesha Tate again and do that rematch?
See, I was looking at the rankings today and I was thinking about it. I was like, it could be a fun one because Miesha's kind of in a weird spot as well, right? It's kind of a similar one too, where she lost the last one to was it Caitlin Vieira?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, that was right. Yeah, I think it was Caitlin Vieira.
So yeah, they're kind of in similar spots. They have the history. They're both kind of marketable names. Like my mom knows who Miesha Tate is because she was on Big Brother in the States or something. So like people know who Miesha Tate is. People know who Holly Holm is from that huge win over Ronda. And I think it makes a lot of sense. And we keep saying Ronda, and there's also rumors that she's coming back. I don't know if I believe those, but you'd have to.
We can talk about that. We have a featherweight fight coming up next, so maybe we can maybe chat about that as well. That's been the rumors coming in. It's like, but yeah, I mean, like. I do understand what you're saying about Holly Holm, but at the end of the day, I look at that last fight. She didn't get sparked. She didn't look like she was hurt all too badly. Look at she got caught in a choke. I think she has a couple of more left in her, but it's like Miesha Tate, I feel, is the next right step. To women who are kind of similar enough in their careers, late resurgence, they're both looking for, and it would be one or the other that would get that final push, maybe to try and maybe go once more for a title shot. But very, very interesting to see. Look, I mentioned in the preview show, I'll maybe pick your brain about this. We've heard Caitlin Chukagian kind of talk about moving up from the 125-pound division. We had Erin Blanchfield throw her hat into the ring, looking to kind of come in and say that she'd be willing to fight for the vacant title at 135. Is there anybody in that division that you feel Amanda Nunes's exit from the division may kind of benefit? Like I kind of like Chukagian wanting to move up. I think, she's tried for the longest time. She was kind of the gatekeeper to the champion there for quite the longest time at 125 and never got a couple of title shots, but never quite did it. I mean, maybe to move up in weight might suit her. And like you said, the division is wide open for some kind of fresh talent to come in there. There's nobody really standing out as the next like young prospect. I'm not saying that Chukagian is going to be that when she comes up, but like there's someone, it's wide open there for someone to kind of go there and take the throne from Amanda Nunes and run with it.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't know how much longer Chukagian has it, the current weight class she's at, at flyweight. I don't think that, it's wise for fighters who have been around for a long time to keep cutting the same weight that they were when they were younger. I think that's just sort of natural for Caitlin to want to move up at this point in her career. So I'd encourage her to do that, no problem. But you mentioned Erin Blanchfield there. That's the name that sticks out to me in that whole division. And if she wants to move up to bantamweight, I think that could be very exciting, especially when you look at the matchups at the top of the division. Like, I think she could compete at the top of bantamweight today. And I think she could also go back and forth between flyweight and bantamweight. So, we always talked about how Amanda Nunes was this double champion, but was she really? I mean, she was a double champion of a division that didn't really exist, that they brought up people from bantamweight to fight in anyway. So it's like, perhaps you could say that, Erin Blanchfield has the best chance to become the true first double champion in women's MMA if she were to go up. But yeah, it's an exciting time.
A little harsh when you kind of take out Cyborg as well as she did. I mean,
that's true.
Agree. I definitely agree that it was that 145 belt was used as a marketing tool by the UFC after that, and it kind of diminished the whole value of it. And I feel Aaron Blanchfield is a very good kind of a fighter to kind of maybe float in between the two divisions. Maybe she'll want to go for the flyweight title first. Maybe she'll move up permanently after that. I mean, very, very difficult too to kind of be moving up and moving down in the weight classes as well. But I definitely agree what you say. Aaron Blanchfield seems to be the one standout in both 125, and I think there's no doubt she moves up to 135 eventually. Do you?
I mean, she's got it at some point, right? You know, and
Yeah.
I think that honestly, with the way that it's shaken out right now, like I said, I think she can compete up there at the top today. And she's still got so much room to grow too as a young fighter. I think she's one of the best. She's still under 25 at this point. She's so young at this point. So, you know, there's always so much room for improvement, like I said, and especially when you're moving up in weight classes, training with different people year round. I think the ceiling's really high on Aaron Blanchfield. And I think that bantamweight honestly might be your best weight class.
100%. Yeah, very well said. Interesting to see what happens in 135. Room for improvement was the statement there. And, you know, that can be kind of stated for Jack Della Maddalena in his co-main event against Bassil Hafez, who came in at very short notice and put up a hell of a fight against the one of the top prospects in the 170-pound division. Look, at a lot of chit-chat here around Jack Della Maddalena's performance here, but I think before we kind of go in and look at the criticisms are just. I mean, he didn't perform to the best of his abilities. There was a lot of controversy surrounding the split decision. None from my end. I thought he won that fight fairly straightforward. Maybe you don't. Maybe you have a different opinion. I'm curious to hear it. But I think the facts of the matter coming in here about Jack Della Maddalena is that this was his second, third opponent change. He cut weight successfully last week before the fight fell out. And then he had to cut weight again this week. And I don't think any fighter is going to go in there and perform at the best of their abilities, having had to cut weight 2 times in basically 1 week or 2 times in 2 weeks. So I felt that those kind of facets kind of took away from Jack Della Maddalena's performance here. But you know what? He still went out there and got the job done. What are your thoughts on basically his performance against Bassil, and maybe how do you feel about the fight and how it was scored and the end result?
I mean, Ian, to be honest with you, I was watching the fight about halfway through the third round. I think I was just really convinced that, you know, Jack was pulling away there at the end. He almost finished him a couple of times, had him really hurt, had him in some bad spots. But then, I don't know if you caught this. He actually got on top of Jack for a few seconds. And I didn't think that mattered at all. But then the commentary told me that might have stolen the fight. So I think this was a robbery. It had to have been.
Absolutely. Well, if you're going and if you have been listening to the balance breakdown or the preview show and you're still going, anyone who's listening off the commentary, you know that you're leading yourself down the wrong path there, because it's just, you know what, Theo, I don't know. Like, I mean, you're obviously with your opinion there, you felt that it was a little bit tongue-in-cheek statement there from yourself, but Dominic Cruz here is like, what is this man smoking at the desk here? I have a good ability. I'll actually listen to fights with the sound on, but I've just number one, I'm kind of half deaf, but number two, I actually have trained my ear not to listen to the commentary anymore. I can just zone in on the fight. So it's like, sometimes I catch some of the nonsense, other times I just choose to ignore it. But I mean, a lot of the controversy here about how fights are scored and a lot of the BS that you'll see, it's like, pick your fight now and let's concentrate on that fight and let's cause some controversy over the scoring. And a lot of it, Theo, is based off what you're hearing about behind the desk, and it's just really not good enough at this stage, isn't it not?
No, and it drives me crazy too that the one thing that they always say over and over and over again is damage. They say, oh, damage is the first criteria. Damage is the first criteria. If you look up the unified rules, you press Control F on your keyboard and you type in the word damage, nothing will pop up. It's not in the rules. It's not in the criteria. It's never been listed there. So why does the UFC insist on pushing on damage? I think they think it's probably just an easier thing to explain to the fans than effectiveness and what effective striking looks like. So I guess in that sense, but you know, you just get these sort of guys who are just parroting everything they say and they go, oh, the first criteria is damage. It's like, have you really read the rules? But yeah, I think a lot of it is just the commentators at times just don't understand how fights are scored. And I also think that people are really hard on the commentators a lot of the times, even in smaller roles of just asking questions at press
You can
conferences.
call Sean Sheehan out on the balance breakdown. That's all good.
I just think that, it's harder to be in that spot that people think, even just in
No, it is.
small.
I had a brief experience at the Irish National Championships. When you're calling a fight, and it's unfair on the judge. Like, I don't know whether the boot are asking these guys to talk about the judging or whether they're just picking this topic up themselves. But like, you've been at live UFC events, you've been cage side before. I had a chance to commentate on one event, and you cannot do both. You're either going to score a fight or you're either going to commentate on a fight. But even when I was over at 289, man, when I was sitting there, I had a couple of people text me. He's like, well, what did it look like? And I was like, I don't fucking know, man. It's so tough with the noise and everything going around. I mean, I think it can't be stated enough how good a job judges do at the best of times, considering, we had to watch back Brandon Moreno and Alexander Pantoja 3 times to kind of get a legit score. And Harry and I, and I'm sure other people did as well. Like, we're asking these guys to kind of get it exactly right straight away after this fight. Like, they have literally 30 seconds to kind of put in their scores, and it's a lot more difficult. But like, I do get what you're saying. You're kind of defending the commentary boot a little bit in the fact that, it's hard to kind of multitask at the same time. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, as much as I can defend them, I guess, when you say something like this guy is on top for 6 seconds after almost getting finished completely, and he might have just won the fight because of that, it's hard to defend that in that sense. But I'm just saying in general, like, it's hard to do commentary. It's hard to talk on a card for, 8 hours at times, So yeah. I think it's really easy for people to sit at home and say, if I was there, I would be saying this. But it's just something that you really don't understand until you really do it. And that's why I have no desire to be a commentator. It's a thankless job. There's no such thing as a perfect night. That's something that John Anik always says. There's always going to be a mistake that someone on Twitter can point out and quote tweet and get a bunch of favorites and whatever. But yeah, I just think it's a thankless job. But with that being said, Dominic Cruz has had some all-time lines through his run as a commentator, from Conor gassing out Khabib with his face to, Jessica Andrade can't lift here, and then she immediately slams Rose on her head. And then we had this one the other night. So it's been a tough run for Dom. I don't know if the Keith Pearson stuff has gotten to him a little bit here or anything, but I just think it's a thankless job.
It appears that kind of has a little bit. I loved Dom at the start, and he kind of has fallen a little bit off for me. But I mean, yeah, it's important to kind of make sure. Like, I mean, I'll watch football, I'll watch soccer, I'll watch American football, I'll watch soccer, and there's nobody really spreading too much misinformation during those broadcasts as well. Okay, you can get a play wrong. You can maybe make a judgment call on a penalty or a free kick or something like that where you get it wrong and you look in the replay. But it's like when it comes to the commentary, there's no kind of, it seems to be any improvements, or they don't seem to learn from any lessons. I know John Anik does an excellent job in trying to, steer things in the right direction, and it's not. But maybe back to the fight. Look at Sal Niamato scored a fight 29-28 for Hafez. And then Camacho and Chris Lee had it for Jack Della Maddalena. The only differential in any of the rounds was Sal Niamato's second round scoring of it for Hafez. But I added 29-28 for Jack Della Maddalena, him losing the first round, obviously with the takedowns of Hafez. They were very effective, and he just went in. We've seen it time and time again, Theo, in the UFC, guys coming in on short notice, making their UFC debut, and just basically Hafez came in here and he was fighting like a man that had nothing to lose, and it really showed in the first round, didn't it?
Yeah, and to be honest with you, he is a guy with nothing to lose. It reminds me a lot of when Chris Mutino stepped up on short notice to fight Sean O'Malley at International Fight Week at UFC 264. He kind of just walked Sean down, even though he wasn't really throwing that much. But what I was super impressed by here was, Bassil's ability to just stay in the pocket with JDM, especially in that first round, and land. That's something that all of JDM's past opponents have been punished severely for. And this guy wasn't going to get finished. He ate a lot of clean shots on the chin, and he was giving them right back. So I was blown away by that. So I think that he impressed. I think he did enough to earn himself a spot on the UFC going forward, which is, all you can really ask for if you're one of these guys filling on short notice against an uber prospect like Jack Della Maddalena.
100%. Yeah, I couldn't have said it any better myself. Look at him, Jack Della Maddalena, he had to dig deep in rounds 2 and rounds 3. And yeah, he was a guy who was under pressure. He was a guy who was unsure of the result as it was being read out. And, that those things happen. I think you have to commend Jack Della Maddalena for taking this chance because, he had to take this fight on short notice as well, having cut weight once already. So people want to sit up and criticize him. I think, I'm not going to judge him based off that performance, but the next one for Jack Della Maddalena, Theo, is going to be very, very important, and how he looks, and that is going to tell us a lot, really. He's looking for a fight on Sydney. Is there anybody kind of standing out that you'd like to see him in there next to it? Sean Brady, I guess, is the one, really, is he? I'd like to see that fight.
Yeah, and I actually, after this fight, I'm more interested in the Sean Brady fight because of the holes that Jack Della Maddalena sort of exposed for himself here. And like you said, tough cutting weight to 170 two times in the span of 2 weeks, or in the span of 1 week, I should say. I do kind of wonder how much that affected him, and not only that.
Oh, that would have affected him an awful lot, Theo. I mean,
100%.
Thinking about, I was surprised that they had it at 170 here. Whereas that, at least you could maybe make it a 175 or even a 180 catch weight or something like that. We've seen that happening time and time again. But maybe Jack Della Maddalena insisted on being 170. It's hard to know what kind of went on, but I can guarantee you, one weight cut can take something out of a fighter. But when you're doing it, and then you have the uncertainty of the mental struggle of, are you going to fight? Are you not going to fight? Having different opponents pull out as well. Like this, since he was originally slated to fight Brady, it was Brady pulled out. Next thing, the replacement pulled out, and Bassil Hafez was the third guy that got put in there. So you're dealing with the struggle of the weight cut on your body. You're dealing with the mental struggle where you're turning your mind on where you are fighting. So when fights are falling out, and then you don't know whether you're going to be able to get back in there again. So that can kind of mess with you kind of mentally as well, where you're coming in the zone and out of the zone. And I think it did show in his performance overall. But like I said, we won't be too harsh on it. You're looking for Sean Brady in Sydney. Is that what you're telling me?
That's what I want. And, going back to the weight cut real quick, I don't think it's a question of, how much of the weight cut affect him, because it obviously had to affect him tremendously. I think the question is, how did it affect him? What aspects of his fighting game were severely diminished because of that? I think a lot of people were really hard on his takedown defense, his wrestling in general, his IQ, to be sure for. But, especially when you do two weight cuts like that, the one thing that's going to be really drained is your strength, your overall athletic ability. And so I think that's really what played in mostly to him not being able to stop the takedowns, which is why I want to see him fight Sean Brady in a full camp. And that's why I think that's the fight to make for Sydney. Not to mention that Sean Brady as well is coming off of that loss to Bilal Muhammad, I believe, correct? And, that was kind of a surprise to a lot of people as well, that he kind of got walked down there by Bilal. I think that he also was sort of diminished in that fight as well, just because of it being in Abu Dhabi. I don't think he acclimated to the climate properly. So I'd hope that he learns his lesson. I don't know what the sea level is over in Sydney, but I'd imagine he wants to get over there soon, just because even though it's not going to be super elevated, it's still a huge change in climate. So I think he's going to be.
It is, yeah. The time that you be fighting at, you really got to adjust your body clock over there and everything like that as well. It'd be interesting to see. Who would you think? Who would you fancy? Would you be looking at maybe Sean Brady after that performance from Jack Della Maddalena, or do you think that Jack Della Maddalena is going to learn from that, grow a little bit, and come in and against Randy Brown, that was his best performance. So he's gone from a really, really good performance against Randy Brown to a less than impressive one on short notice. I think I can't stop looking at the asterisks of the what happened before the fight, but it does make this fight with Sean Brady a little bit more interesting. I would have preferred Jack Della Maddalena maybe kind of coming into that fight when it was originally slated. Having watched this fight, maybe it'd be a little bit closer, but I think circumstances change. Where it is changes kind of the opinion on when it's going to happen. Who would you say is going to win that fight? How do you think they match up?
Who knows? Who knows? I don't know. You don't know. Nobody knows. There's no way to know. But I think after watching that fight, I started to think about, how would Sean Brady be taking the shots from JDM? I think we're used to watching JDM just slice through people in the first round in the UFC. But Sean Brady's not that guy. You're not going to be able to get him out of there. And so I think about what that fight looks like in the later rounds when Sean Brady's still there in his face. What's Jack's gas tank look like on a full camp without having to cut weight twice? Is he going to be able to stop the pressure of the takedowns and all those sorts of things? I think Sean's going to be able to make that fight dirty, gross, and grimy for Jack the further it goes along. So I think this fight's definitely a lot closer than I thought it would have been previously to this fight. But
for sure,
I'd still have to go with JDM here, just because I think he hits just too hard. I don't think that he'll stop Sean Brady necessarily in the early goings, but I think that'll be enough for him to get it done.
Yeah, very well broken down. And I'm thinking around the same myself, is that, I think Bassil Hafez kind of maybe set the blueprint on how you can try and beat a guy like Jack Della Maddalena, but unfortunately, I don't think he had the gas tank in him to kind of commit to that for 3 rounds. I think we saw that on Saturday night as well. But yeah, it's closing that distance, and it's not letting Jack Della Maddalena kind of control the distance and get off his boxing, where he can hurt guys, and we've seen him do that before. So maybe the key ingredient is there getting in safely, closing the distance, getting Jack Della Maddalena on his back, and just frustrating him. And like if Sean Brady can do that 2 out of 3 rounds, I mean, there's nothing saying that he can't take home the win too. But I'd love to see that. Fingers crossed that the UFC make that happen. In Sydney or wherever. I don't care. I'd watch that fight in my backyard if they wanted to put it on out there as well. I'm sure you would too, Theo. But we'll move on.
Well, did you see what everyone's talking about online?
No. What is everybody talking about online?
Well, the reaction I saw on Twitter release was that don't ever compare Ian Gary to JDM ever again.
Oh, yeah,
which I think is a crazy thing to say, first of all, because JDM is 100% a legit fighter. He's still ranked in the welterweight division. But man, you got to think that fight looks a lot different now after watching that last one. I just think, man, people have been sleeping on Ian Gary for so long. I really think that Ian can strike with anybody at welterweight. But, you know, when you see a guy like Jack Della Maddalena who's able to cut in the distance, who's able to disrupt range like that and get inside and hit really hard, we've seen Ian get cracked already against Song Kenan. I just think that's a great fight, and I really do want to see that. And I know that I'm typically not a fan of having guys on the rise fight each other before they really reach the upper echelons of the division. Yeah. But after watching, honestly, Ryan Garcia versus Tank Davis, I'm all about guys finding each other on the way up while they still have their momentum. So I'm all in on that fight as well.
Yeah, I like that. I like that too. I don't necessarily like it, depending on circumstances, like a Jack Della Maddalena and Ian Gary fighting. I think maybe in any of the next 3 fights for the gentlemen, but I think with that win over, oh my goodness, Ian Gary's last win against Rodriguez. Sorry, I forgot his name, Daniel Rodriguez. I think he's kind of jumped himself onto the pedestal to I would say the second biggest prospect in the 170-pound division behind Shavkat Rakhmonov, to be honest. If you want to call Rakhmonov a prospect at this stage, I think he's kind of come up there after beating Jeff Neal himself. But of the 3, I guess those are the 3 you're kind of putting on that pedestal in 170. It will be Ian Gary, Jack Della Maddalena, and Sean Brady as well. And I think if it doesn't happen now, if it doesn't happen in a year, I think if those guys all keep progressing, they're all young in the game, I think it's going to happen eventually. Like with those 3 then, you know, you're still kind of leaning towards Jack Della Maddalena against Ian Gary. Is that what you're telling me? Like, if you were to give me the 3, we're talking about this as being 3 prospects, right? 170, Ian Gary, Jack Della Maddalena, Sean Brady. Rank them 1, 2, and 3 for me, in your opinion.
I think it's the way you just said it. I think it goes Ian, JDM, Sean Brady. And I honestly just think that, you know, not to say that Randy Brown isn't a great win, but I just think that Ian's got a better win in D-Rod right now. This next fight against Jeff Neal is going to be a huge one to see where he really is in that division. If he can deal with the aggressiveness of Jeff Neal, I think that's one thing that people have been claiming he's been protected from this whole time, as someone who can truly grapple, who can truly, you know, put it on with their strength. But, you know, I think if you're looking at just a purely striking battle between Jack Della Maddalena and Ian Gary, I think his distance wins that fight. I think he's able to move in and out of range better than JDM is able to. And, you know, I just think that Sean Brady might be a tier below those guys. But in saying that, I think that his style could still, you know, prove to be successful against them. Like, I think he could easily beat Ian. I think he could easily beat Jack Della Maddalena just because of that style. But I don't think that he has a higher ceiling than either of those guys. So when you're asking me to rank them, I'm going to go with Ian, Jack, and then Sean.
I tend to agree with that as well. And I think with Ian as well, as we see him fight more and more up the rankings, I feel we're going to like unlock new levels. Whereas that, you know, and I wasn't even privy to this, but I kind of came to the conclusion after the Daniel Rodriguez fight that I felt that Ian was fighting to the level of his competition somewhat, and that we haven't seen a lot of the facets of his game, and we haven't seen much of the growth because he hasn't been in there with anybody who's been able to take that or for him have to use those skills. And maybe Jeff Neal is the guy where we see it. I think Ian's striking is a lot more polished than Jack Della Maddalena and Sean Brady's, to be honest. I think that we haven't seen Ian Gary's ground game yet, but it is very, very underrated. And with all the moves that he's making over with Charles Oliveira now and the work in Brazil, that's going to get better and better. So I think it's a fair assessment in both of our rankings. We're both thinking the same here in Ian Gary, JDM, and then Sean Brady, 1, 2, 3. But I mean, I would be absolutely blown away if we didn't see all of those guys fight one another in the next 5 years or so. I think they're all on the rise. They're all on the up and up, and it's going to be very exciting to see how the welterweight division materializes over the next couple of years. Something I was very excited about seeing, and moving on, is Yu Young Park's performance, Theo, against Albert Jurayev in the middleweight division. And I swear, like, this was Park's best performance of his career so far. This guy didn't really show anything. Look at Ju Young Park showed the level of, aggression. He likes to move forward and he likes to get off his shots. But sometimes that was to his detriment. He's won some good knockout wins. He's suffered a couple of knockouts himself, but he seemed to put everything together against Albert Jurayev. And I was massively impressed by his performance on Saturday night. Look, the round 1 was close enough. He won it on 2 of the 3 judges' scorecards. Park did, but he came out and made no mistake in round 2, going on and getting that rear naked choke finish against a pretty durable Jurayev as well. Were you just as impressed as I was with Jun Young Park in that fight?
I was very impressed by Park in this fight. That's 4 in a row for him now. That jab was working wonders for him all night, and then we started putting the 1-2 behind it as well. That's a dangerous guy in that division. I think a lot of people are still sleeping on him, unfortunately. You've got a guy now who, he can throw the good straights as well. He can grapple. He's tough as hell. That's a dangerous fighter for anybody. That's a tough guy to get out of there. And, like I said earlier with, Mayra, if you're willing to get in there and take risks and you're also tough, that's a tough person to get rid of. And that's, even the best people in the world can sort of, fight down their competition, as you had said previously, with a guy like that. So, for me, Park is the dark horse in that division. I was very impressed by him in that fight. And honestly, I want to get your thoughts on this because I think the next fight for him is a ranked opponent. And I think the perfect guy right now, given both of their momentums, is Chris Curtis, because that guy's on, he's got 1 win in his last 4 fights. And like I said, Park's got a 4-fight win streak going. It's at that point right now where you got to ask Chris Curtis to defend his ranking, and Park's the guy to defend it against. I want to know what you think.
Absolutely. I love that idea. And I was thinking exactly the same lines myself, Theo, because look at you're talking about Park now, who has snuck up the middleweight rankings and definitely deserves this now. His only loss was against Gregory Rodriguez. And look at Robocop can bang. And that was a fight. That was one of the craziest fights that I've ever seen as well. They just started swinging. And of course, you get involved in a fight like that, you can get clipped. And unfortunately, Park was on the wrong end of a knockout loss that time against him. But, I got back on the horse, won a split decision over Eric Anders. Good win and a finish by rear naked choke against Joseph Holmes. Did the same against Dennis Tadulin and done the exact same again against Albert Jurayev. And we can see the progression up there in the kind of challenges that he has to face. And I think to go out there and not alone just be on a 4-fight win streak, but to have finished 3 of your last 4 fights as well, that definitely warrants a step up and definitely a crack at the rankings for Park. And I thought the minute I saw that fight finish, I was like, that guy is ready. You can just sense it. And with a nickname like the Iron Turtle, man, I mean, you can just market that shit to all day long. I love it. But is it one of the best nicknames in the game right now? It has to be. It has to be. It definitely does. But at 32, not time is against him now. He needs to kind of make that move into the top 15. And I think Chris Curtis is an excellent kind of a test for him in that division too. A guy who will stand and bang. It will complement Park's style. But, Park showed a good level of well-roundedness against Jurayev here. On the feet, we've seen him crack before. But, he showed here that he can put your back against the cage. He can take you down and he can go and get the submission. And we've seen that in previous fights as well. So he is a real big dark horse in that division, isn't he?
Has to be. And also, when you think about the landscape of middleweight, I think Israel Adesanya's title reign has kind of shown a lot of people that the middleweight might not be as deep as we previously thought. And so when you got guys who are unranked, who are that close to getting a spot, I'd like to see him push more. A guy like Park is perfect for that division. I think that he can give promise to people at the top as well. Not saying he's ready right now, but just his style, I think, matched up really well with a lot of guys in the top 15 spots. Yeah, I'm super impressed by the way he performed here. And like you said, the Taurus, as he's called, is one of the best names I've heard. And also his dance at the end.
Yes, it
Fantastic
was very
stuff.
funny, very funny. Yeah, he ticked off all the boxes on Saturday night, and just to kind of maybe piggyback off a point, like in the middleweight division, not that talent rich, like you said, right? It doesn't take an awful amount to get up to the top. So, I mean, you go in there against Chris Curtis, you win that, you maybe get a top 10 fight, you win that. And then one more fight, and you're almost in the cusp of a title shot. Like we've seen it with Dricus du Plessis, seen it with, I think, Alex Pereira being the best example, although that was somewhat manufactured by the UFC to kind of create that rivalry again in mixed martial arts. But I mean, if there's any division where you want to see a guy has the ability to move up to the top of the rankings, it's definitely in that middleweight division, because there's a lot of winnable fights there for a lot of the young up and comers, or guys like Park who've been around for quite some time, who've started to come on a late career resurgence. Very interesting to see how it progresses for him. I like that Chris Curtis shout. That's a very, very good shout here. Norma Dumont versus Chelsea Chandler produced probably one of the funniest moments that I've seen in quite some time. A meme or a gif that's going to last forever, Theo, when Chelsea Chandler took that, or what was it, a right hook from Norma Dumont, and decided to go on her skates and run directly into the far side of the cage and against one of the posts. What were you thinking when you seen that, man? That was crazy.
I've had many reactions watching fights live over the years. Mostly I just stand up and scream when something crazy happens, but this was the first time I actually laughed out loud watching a fight. I genuinely cackled in my seat. I couldn't believe what I was watching. If the cage wasn't there, she would have ran right out the apex, I think. But yeah, it was just a crazy thing to see. We see guys kind of run away to reset, to get away from them so they can get back in a better position. But she was just going. She was just running away.
Oh,
So
yeah.
yeah, I thought that was crazy, especially with the way that the buildup happened. I don't know if you saw this video of them backstage beforehand
I
after the
did.
weigh-ins, talking back and forth. It's tough to, talk all that smack and then run away in the first round like that. So
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, because it's interesting to create a bit of hype, but I think the decision from Chelsea Chandler to kind of ruffle up the feathers of Norma Dumont kind of came back to bite her in the ass, really, on Saturday night. Dumont came out there and showed a level of aggressiveness that we've not seen from her all that much inside the cage. Like, very, very good jabber. I always like Norma Dumont to the jab. Always has a good, clean jab, but never really worked too much in after that. Happy enough to kind of fight at distance and get off her 1-2s, but she was letting it all out there on Saturday night, getting off the jab, but also following up with some big shots in the pocket, running after Chelsea when she got there, landing big shots too. So it seems, what you don't want to do with Norma Dumont is go out there and talk shit to her, because it seems that you unlock a beast. And, she's been performing well in the, like, I guess, maybe the unofficial 145-pound champion right now. She's been up there. She's fought the most amount of fights there. I think she broke the record, I believe, for the most wins in the featherweight division. Did she on Saturday night? Maybe I saw that somewhere. I'm not too sure. Maybe you
she
can kind of.
did. She
She
did. The
did.
grand total of 5 was good enough for the record in that division.
Nice. So, I mean, look at the division we talked about it already. It's nearly not even worthy of calling a division, really, Theo. Very little talent in there. The UFC have done little over the last couple of years to kind of maybe develop and bring that talent into it. What do you see happening for the 145-pound division? It was just notified that that division has been completely taken off the rankings now at this stage. So it actually doesn't officially exist within the UFC anymore. So it'll be interesting to see what to do with it. Do you think it's going to be, they're going to stick with it? Do you think, we talked about Ronda, maybe we'll talk about Ronda in a little bit, but what do you see the future of the 145-pound division, if you do see a future for it at all?
Yeah, I mean, if not for a massive signing that we aren't foreseeing, if Kayla Harrison somehow were to come over to the UFC, or like you mentioned, Ronda for some reason comes out of retirement after these many years, I guess that would be a reason enough. But, if you're just going to have people fighting in this division that means nothing, there's not going to be any title fights, why not just make them fight at catch weights above bantamweight? What's the point of having a real division? So I've kind of been waiting to see why they've been keeping it around for so long. Maybe they thought that they could bring someone over. Maybe they thought, I know before Pena beat Nunez that they were looking at really bringing Kayla over, but that all
Yeah.
fell apart. So, yeah, I guess at this point, really, what's left to put on display at featherweight? Really, not to say there's not great fighters around the world at featherweight, because there are. I think in other organizations they do have some good fighters, but I just don't know why the UFC would.
Yeah, I think it was kept around basically just so that we could call Amanda Nunes the double champion, like you
Right.
alluded to earlier on. And, respect to the UFC for doing that. I think they did that out of respect of Amanda and what she did. And she defended a couple of times as well. But that's why I kind of called it a marketing tool a little bit earlier on because, you get the two belts on, you can market Amanda as the double champion, but she's hung up her gloves now. So, I mean, I think they kind of told us what they're going to do by removing it from the official rankings. Um, why we're still having fights there, yeah, maybe you can just give a fighter a break or two from cutting down to 135, or maybe you have that catch weight. But I mean, it doesn't seem necessary to have fights at 145. But would Norma Dumont be a person that you feel that you could build a division around? I mean, her fighting style isn't great. She doesn't really have really a marketable personality, kind of keeps to herself. Obviously has time to grow in as a fighter as well. Like, she's the most winningest fighter now in the featherweight division. Like, could you see the UFC maybe wanting to maybe build a division around her? Because they're going to need a hell of a lot of work.
I love that you use the term build a division around this fighter because really we've only seen it a handful of times in the history of the sport, right? So I guess they didn't really build the featherweight division around Jose Aldo, but they sort of brought him over, crowned him champion right away. So it takes a fighter of that caliber. And you think also when they brought over the women's bantamweight initially and they just crowned Ronda the champion right away, that's a fighter you build the division around. Not to say that Norma Dumont's not great, but she's not an all-time great. And I think that's just what you need to build a division around someone. And like I said, if Kayla Harrison were for some reason to come over or Ronda were to come back, that's someone I think you could justify keeping that division around for. Not to say Norma Dumont's not great because she is, but she's a bantamweight fighter at the end of the day. She's already ranked in that division. I don't see the need to sort of dilute the talent between those two divisions just to have another women's division. If they bring over the proper fighters, absolutely go for it. But it just feels forced at this point. And so I'd rather they just not entertain that.
Yeah, and it's like the talent is out there. It has to be said. Like, I mean, Bellator have a pretty decent 145-pound division. PFL, it's not too bad over there either. But it's like, yeah, they're doing their thing over there. So like, fighters aren't going to be forthcoming, especially if you don't have any guarantee that the division is going to be around for the foreseeable future. You sign up. I really think you've mentioned Kayla Harrison a couple of times. I think that she's really missed the boat on coming over and signing with the UFC. I think she should have done it at that time. Obviously, PFL matched her deal, and it was probably more difficult than what it should have been. But you have talks of her coming over and fighting Amanda Nunes, and like she could have gone there. Whether she would have won or not, that's a different story, but they would have kept her around, and she would have been a person that you could have built the division around. But I don't even think that's a possibility right now. She's coming off a loss of Larissa Pacheco. She has to try and get that back. She's been peculiarly on the sidelines a lot of this year as well. And I think, it's not really worked out as well as she thought it was going to work out a couple of years back for Kayla Harrison. So it'll be interesting to see how it happens there. If I was to guess, I think they're going to probably just have an odd fight at 145 in the UFC and probably not bring back that division unless Ronda comes back. You think she's going to come back? Would it be a wise move for her to come back?
I don't think it makes any sense at all. Like I sent this into the group message the other day and I was like, I don't believe this at all, but if it's any sort of true, it's insane. How long has it been since Ronda Rousey's fought? Has it been 7
years now.
6 years, something like that?
UFC 200, I guess it was. Yeah.
Come back for what? To prove what? People already recognize you as the trailblazer in women's MMA. You've already made a ton of money. You had a lot of success over the WWE. Why come back and fight now? It doesn't make any sense to me. Not only that, but I'd have a hard time believing that she's been practicing MMA related techniques over this time frame. I think she's taken a lot of damage as a wrestler, as all those people over there do. It's a crazy business that they're in as well. 100%. So I just don't see why Ronda would. I don't think the UFC needs Ronda right now. Not to say that she wouldn't be a huge draw.
I think UFC would love to bring in Ronda because they always want. Man, I think if Ronda wanted to come back in the morning, they would sign her up instantly because she's another star. But I don't know how well it would work. It's because I feel if Ronda Rousey was going in there and being well outmatched 6 years ago, the game has passed her by much more here. So I think the UFC would be chomping at the bit to bring her back and sell a pay-per-view and make a shit ton of money off her. But how prolonged could they make it is another thing. And I think it wouldn't last that long either. And I think she probably knows that too. And I think whenever the decision made, there's been no official comment from her yet, but it'd be interesting to see. But I'd be very surprised to see her come back. And I'd be very surprised to see her come back and want to go on a run of defending titles as well, because it's going to be bad news for her, I think.
Not to say that she can't still move pay-per-views, because she absolutely can. I remember when she was coming up at the same time as Conor and people were debating who was the bigger draw at the time. That was a real discussion people had. Obviously, over time, we've seen who the bigger draw is, obviously. But, obviously, the UFC would welcome back a huge star like her. I just think at this point, they don't have to. They're making more money than they ever have. Their profit margins are skyrocketing as fighter pay is going down. I don't think that they need Ronda right now necessarily. And I think that the relationship she has with Dana White is one where it kind of reminds me of the Chuck Liddell situation. Obviously not as severe because Chuck went out really sad at the end. But I don't think that Dana is in a rush to throw Ronda in a cage right now, considering the kind of lifestyle she has. So that's just why I don't think it's realistic on both ends.
It's a very, very fair statement and very well said as well. I'd maybe minorly argue is that the UFC endeavor and Dana White never fell out with ever making any more money. I don't think they'd be, if they can get anything that they can, they'll bring it in. But I honestly think it's not going to happen. And that brings us another segue to our opening fight on the main card, and talking about things not happening. Things ain't happening for Terrence McKinney. I mean, he's talking the talk, he's walking the walk, but he's fallen to 13-6 after suffering a rear naked choke submission loss to Nazim Sadikov, who came in here on his UFC debut, I believe, off the Contender Series. And, I mean, had his back taken for the majority of the first round here, Theo. Terrence McKinney couldn't do anything with it. Actually, it was Sadikov's second UFC fight, his 2-0 since making his appearance on the Dana White Contender Series. But yeah, it's a guy who's picked up a lot of hype in the UFC lightweight division in recent times. Very outspoken, has a fantastic story in Terrence McKinney, but didn't work out all that well for him on Saturday night, Theo.
Yeah, no, I mean, at this point, you've kind of got to question what type of fighter Terrence McKinney is. Not to say he's not unbelievably talented, because he obviously is, but it just seems at this point he's a bit of a front runner. You see these guys come through the UFC. Some of them are more than fine with being the hammer, but you have to be willing to be the nail sometimes. I don't know if Terrence 100%. McKinney loves that. I don't think he deals well with pressure. I don't think he loves being hit. I think there's a lot of red flags there, but I was thinking about this a lot because Terrence is so talented. He's still so young. He's still very athletic. He's still a dangerous fighter every time he's in there. A very talented striker, obviously. I would usually be counting a guy out by now, in the situation of Terrence. But, I always think back of, the way that Brandon Moreno left the UFC and said he'll be champion one day, and he came back and achieved that. I think of the way that Charlie Oliveira was written off for much of his career, despite, coming back now and looking better than ever. So, I've kind of learned at this point to never truly count guys out, but I'd be very surprised to see Terrence McKinney make a true run at the title at this point in his career. But that's not to say it's not possible, because he's got the tools to do it. So, maybe if he switches camps, if he changes something up in that sense, he can put it all together. But it's going to take a lot for Terrence at this point, I think.
It definitely is now. And his back is against the wall now as well, Theo. 3 losses and 1 win in his last 4 fights, 2 wins and 3 losses in his last 5. We'll go back that far. And I love your point about him liking being the hammer but not liking being the nail, because that was exactly the read that I got. But being the hammer as well, you've got to know how to hit the nail, and he tried to do that in the first round. He had back control, he controlled the fight for long periods but was unable to do anything, and Nazim Sadikov just said, "Here, hold my beer, I'm going to show you how it's done." In round 2, just briefly took the back and wrapped in that rear naked choke. And I mean, he moves to 9-1. And what Terrence McKinney's loss is Nazim Sadikov's gain in this fight. Really, he picks up all the hype now, and he looks like a pretty exciting prospect as well. And to go out there, look at a little bit of a slow start, but that can be understandable. But he went in there with an experienced UFC fighter, and he got him out of there. And he looks a bit promising in the UFC as well. I think, how far do you think I know it's hard to tell. He's 29 years of age, similar enough age to McKinney, but you think he's going to be pushed along the lines of the Drew Dober fights or the Ishmael Bonfims, and maybe try and put him in some of the challenges that Terrence McKinney has been in already?
Yeah, I like that you mentioned Dober and Bonfim there. I think that is sort of the echelon he is moving towards at this point. But like you said, he's still 29, still fresh in the UFC game at this point. So it's really hard to tell, not only for those reasons, but also just how deep lightweight is and how it always has been. It's just so hard to see these young guys coming in and seeing, how talented they are, but thinking about, well, they have to go through X, Y, and Z at the top, and that's no easy task. So I think, if a type of fighter like him was in a different division, I'd be more willing to say, oh, this guy will definitely be ranked. He'll definitely go this way and he'll do these sorts of things. He'll accomplish so much. But it's just so hard at lightweight to say, yeah, this guy definitely can make it to the top because they're so good up near the championship level. So, I don't know. He certainly has the tools. Nazim is incredibly impressive, a dangerous grappler. The way he was able to take that back with ease is something that I think a lot of guys got to look out for in that division. He's sneaky like that. But it's just hard for me to say right now, like, will he ever be a top 5 guy? It's doubtful, but he certainly has got the skills.
He definitely does. I love your point there about the talent-rich lightweight division as well. It's something that we've talked about with Paddy Pimblett in the past, is that, like, you can only match him maybe so fairly for his level of skill set for so long. And we've already seen him tested against Jared Gordon. And it's the same can be said here about McKinney, and the same can be said here about Sadikov, because the lightweight division is so talent rich. There's so many difficult tasks there. Even to get into the top 15, you've got to go through killer's row. I think the same can be said about bantamweight and even featherweight as well. Those 3 divisions are just so hard to break into the top 15. And then, of course, you've got the job when you do break into the top 15 to stay there in the top 10 is a different story altogether. But interesting to see how things will go for Sadikov there as well. Just to run through a couple of the prelim fights. Melsik Bagdasharian took on Tucker Lutz, won a unanimous decision. Any quick thoughts on that? Were you impressed by the performance? I mean, it was a typical Bagdasharian performance there. It wasn't really anything to write home about. I don't think he'll be looking to improve on his next fights. I think anything to take home from that fight?
I mean, I don't really think that we learned much about him. Like you said, it was a bit of a typical performance by him, kind of what I expected going in. And yeah, it was just kind of synonymous with all these other fights on the prelims. It just didn't really have much action going for it. But I thought it was decent enough. I think he is improving in that sense. But yeah, I mean, not a momentum killer by any means, not a terrible fight to have, still a win, but and not one that I think people are itching to watch him again for.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. And I mean, me and Harry talked about this on the preview. Is like you have to go 8 fights deep to find somebody coming off a win on this. And I think, it was that bad on paper and it was that bad in viewing as well. It was that no one really took the bull by the horns. Look at Estela Nunes was very unfortunate in that fight against Victoria Dudikova, who moved to 7-0 after that injury. It happened very early in round 1. That was nasty, Theo. How do you like looking at injuries like that?
I hate it. I hate it so much. I can't. For some reason, I can watch people get punched in the face, cut open, whatever. That stuff doesn't bother me. But it's the limbs when they snap, man. That's what always gets me. I'll never forget sitting cage side at UFC 261 when Chris Weidman snapped his leg, and that was my first event cage side. I almost threw up. I had to walk out of the arena for a little bit, and the entire arena was shocked, covering their face, running away. The only person in the arena, I don't know if you know who this is, but Chad Ochocinco is a big star in the U.S. He's a big NFL wide receiver star.
I know him. Yeah.
He was sitting right next to me, and he was laughing during this exchange. Like after he was like kind of like covering up. He was like laughing at the whole thing. And I was like, "You're a sicko." But yeah,
I don't necessarily like looking at them myself, but I force myself to look at them because that's the reality of the situation when you're in there. Stuff like that can happen. And Estela Nunes was coming in there backwards against the wall. She needed a win to kind of keep her UFC job, in my opinion. Comes out with a fight with a dislocated elbow. We wish her a speedy recovery. We didn't learn too much from that fight either. She broke a really important rule that you're supposed to do when you're defending takedowns, and never ever post on your arm, because that's what happens. We've seen it with Shogun Rua back in the day when Mark Coleman tried to take him down and he snapped his arm. It's just not good. You're taking your full weight and your opponent's full weight on your arm, and that's why. And I had to learn that over here in Canada as well. Theo, when I'm walking on the snow and the ice in the winter, Never put your arm out. Always look to fall on your shoulder, on your elbow, because you put your arm out, that is going to equal bad news. And look, I have to say, it took me a couple of winters to stay on my feet. The last couple of ones I've been going well, but I fell on my ass a couple of times, and you have to learn how to fall in those situations. And unfortunately for Stella, she dislocated her elbow, and hopefully she'll be back. Hopefully she gets another chance in the UFC as well. Moving on down, we were excited to see Miguel Costa, who climbed to 20-6, who picked up a win against Austin Lingo. Fight wasn't really great either, to be honest. But, you know, Miguel Costa came in. He impressed in previous performances. A pretty decent win against Austin Lingo. But like I said, nothing else really to write home about. Any thoughts on this? With Costa, he had a difficult time against Thiago Moises. We were excited to come in and see, because he was competitive in that fight. But he didn't really show too much in this fight, really, to get too excited about seeing him again.
Right, yeah, another pretty tentative fight, not a lot of action going on, but I did like his body attacks. I thought he was ripping up the body pretty good at some points early on in the fight. I think that's honestly what made his opponent here not want to engage with him and not really go back and forth as the fight went on. But, you know, like you said, not much to write home about. Certainly one of the fights of all time. It was certainly a fight, Ian.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have the worst fight of the year category. I mean, you could be putting a lot of these prelims fights on it. I'll run through real quickly for the last couple of fights here, and I'll just share some of your thoughts on some of these fights as well. Evan Elder picked up a unanimous decision win over Genaro Valdez in the 155 lightweight division. Azat Maxim beat Tyson Nam. Always a good win when you beat Tyson Nam. That was a split decision, and Maxim moved to 17-0. And he looks like a prospect in the 125-pound division, Theo. Would you agree with that?
100%. And I think that flyweight right now is actually extremely exciting, especially when you look at guys like Muhammad Makhayev on the rise up. You know, we've been hearing for years that this guy is one of the best prospects in the history of the sport. So, yeah, I love that division. I've always loved watching the flyweights fight. I think they're extremely exciting to watch with the speed in that division. It's always a great fight. So, yeah, add another prospect to the mix. I'm all about it.
Hashtag fly never die. Alex
Fly never
Munoz.
die.
Alex Munoz took on Carl Deaton III in the lightweight division. That was a unanimous decision win over Munoz. Not a great fight. And a really, really terrible fight between Aileen Perez and Ashley Evans Smith. I actually think this is like the prime candidate for one of the worst fights of the year. Just a dreadful, awful one. Look at Ashley Evans Smith, who's been thereabouts for the last while in the women's 135-pound division. She returned. She talked about a little bit of her rejuvenation, but that was not on show in the cage. She fell to 6-6, and is probably all but done inside the UFC at this stage as well. I don't think you're going to have too many thoughts, but I'm going to give you the chance to share any of your thoughts on those final two fights.
Well, I mean, honestly, I think Perez was actually the standout on this prelim card. Not to say that she had great competition to show against, but I do think that, you know, if you're looking at other people on this card, you know, I think that she did have the most impressive dominant performance of all of them. And she got a 30-25 actually on one of the scorecards, which is, you know, that's a statement win right there. Right.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, maybe I was a little bit harsh on her overall, but it was just, I think you hit the nail on the head there. There was like very little competition coming back in return for her. But I mean, she went in there and she got the job done. That's what you got to do against people like Ashley Evans Smith. And, you know, at least she can build off that and she can move forward in the 135-pound division. Look at the 135-pounders kicked us off, and we finished off with the 135-pounders at the top of the bill in the main event as well. I mean, overall, Theo, when you were looking at this card, what was the biggest story coming out from you? Who was the person who most impressed you coming out of this card?
Man, I mean, you'd have to say Mayra at the top right for people who impressed you. You know, I think that she certainly gained the most out of her victory, given, you know, the state of her division. I think that she's immediately in the title picture right now with that win over Holly Holm. But I still think the biggest story coming out of this fight, I think the thing that people were talking about the most was how Jack Della Maddalena looked. You know, I think that was the main thing, and I think people are overlooking him just because of that. And like I said, you know, you got to factor in the weight cut, you got to factor in the different opponent on short notice, you got to factor in all these different things. So, yeah, keep an eye on JDM going forward here. I think he's going to be an interesting guy to watch to see really where his ceiling is, because I don't think that last performance was really indicative of the type of fighter he is. But yeah, that's my biggest takeaway, I guess, from this card is that, you know, JDM might not be the guy that we thought he was, but yeah, it's going to be interesting to follow.
Yeah, 100%. I would kind of agree with that level of thinking as well coming out with this card. Look at one that not really got the juices flowing. Couple of stories. We always have something to talk about in these cards as well, Theo. And it was great to talk to you about this card. Before I let you go, I'm going to pick your brain about a little bit of a news story that did break today, and that was the free agent that is MVP is hot on the market right now. And we had a little bit of chat in the group first. So I said, let's pick your brain about. I know I'd love to see him in the UFC. I know you'd love to see him in the UFC. What's the possibilities for a guy like MVP right now?
I mean, you got to think about what the UFC is going to be offering him. That's the first thing that's got to come to mind. And, Sean Sheen was tweeting about this himself. It's going to be hard for me to imagine a world where the UFC is really backing out the Brinks truck to bring in MVP. Not to say that he's not a great guy, not to say he's not worth that amount of money, but it's just, not typical what the UFC is kind of aligning themselves with recently. But if there is a world where he is going to the UFC, and, I think he did mention today that he's willing to take a sort of pay cut to go to the UFC if that is an option for him. So if that's the case, man, welterweight is going to be a lot of fun. We mentioned Ian Gary earlier on the show. That's a great fight. People have always been oozing over him versus Stephen Wonderboy Thompson potentially. That'd be a great fight as well. There's a ton of options for him at welterweight. I'd love to see him in the mix, but I think honestly the most likely landing spot for him is going to be PFL. When you consider it's still a top level promotion, there's still good fighters in that division. They're going to pay him probably more than anyone else is, and you got to factor in also he could potentially win $1 million at the end of the year. And also, they're more willing to let you go out and do other things. He had that odd fight in bare knuckle with Mike Perry that Bellator was very graceful in letting them go do. The UFC, as we know, is never going to let you do that sort of thing unless they're getting a major cut of it, which MVP is not in the position to do. And I do think that he probably does have ambitions of doing other combat sports outside of MMA right now. So I think PFL just gives him the best option because they'll give him the flexibility as well.
He's the star power, he's the quality, and he has the kind of personality to kind of make waves in the UFC. I think, once upon a time it would be a no-brainer, but yeah, everything that you said about, the current structure of the UFC, I'd be kind of leaning of it not happening, but I'm going to keep my fingers and my toes crossed that it makes it happen. Just sign him up to the UFC and have him fight strikers for the rest of his career. Keep him away from fucking Bilal Muhammad. Keep him away from Gilbert Burns. Keep him away from Colby Covington. Keep him away from Kamaru Usman. Just have him go in there and have like striking battles with Thompson, Jeff Neal. I mean, hell, put him in there with Vicente Luque on his UFC debut. I mean, that'd be a crack. I'd put him in there against anyone, even the ones you mentioned, Thompson, Ian Gary. I mean, the options would be endless. It'll be interesting to see what happens there with MVP. But that kind of wraps us up for the balance breakdown this week, Theo. It was a debut to remember, man. You absolutely killed it. Absolutely killed it. Very happy to have you on. Great to pick your brain about a couple of these fights, and hopefully this won't be the last one too. I know myself and Harry are, maybe I'm going to put you on the spot here now. Me and Harry are going to do a live stream on Saturday for UFC London. You might be even able to come on and share your thoughts on a couple of those fights. I don't know how it works out a little bit earlier in the day for you. Maybe we can talk about that off camera, but we will be breaking down the UFC card with the preview. Harry and I will be joining forces to talk and live stream that card from top to tail. A huge card and a huge event. Obviously, Sean O'Bannon making her debut as well. Maybe Theo will be there, maybe Theo won't be there. I'll keep you in suspense until Saturday. But until then, if you want to see more of Theo, head over to Twitter and follow Theo at Lander, LANDER_Theo. You'll catch him there. You'll see him on SevereMMA.com with the UFC recaps every single Saturday. And they might catch you live at UFC Boston too, Theo. Is that right?
Potentially. We'll see what happens with that. But that's sort of the plan going forward right now. Ian, my man, thank you so much for having me on. It was a pleasure, brother. And I will see you on Saturday.
Absolutely. I love it. We've confirmed it. We've nailed it in. That's it, folks. If you like what you hear, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, go follow Theo. You can follow me at O'Neill MMA. Go and hit up the L Triangle this week. Big week for Irish MMA. UFC London previews coming on Thursday. Live watch along is coming on Saturday. We will see you then. Good luck, goodbye, and God.